So far, over the last couple of days, I've heard a lot of the standard things that we all talk about, such as content marketing, personalisation, social, mobile, data analytics, digital, interconnectivity, programmatic, disruption, all of the words that we hear just about every single day. But what we haven't heard is that we haven't heard anything about advertising as a whole, what we think of the industry as a whole. So, and that is asking questions like, what impact does advertising have on the economy? How many people are reliant upon the industry for employment? And how does advertising really drive social and commercial benefits throughout the community? So this is a subject that the Comms Council has been interested in for some time, and so we put together a steering committee with Jason Lonsdale, Jason Buckley, Sudeep Gohill, and to give further credence to Michelle O'Neill's theories, two Andrews, who are CEOs, Andrew Fabro and Andrew Baxter. And as a result of that, we decided to contract Deloitte Access Economics to undertake a study to actually identify and quantify all of those things. We went to Deloitte for two major reasons. One is that they'd done similar studies in the UK, so they knew how these things worked, and it had never been done in Australia, so this is a brand new study. And two, being independent and with the reputation they have, they give us unique connections into the highest levels of commercial and government that there is in this country, which we thought was pretty important, because if we're just there talking about it, people think the same old things. So we've got two of the authors here today, John O'Mahony, who's an economist and a partner of Deloitte Access Economics, and David Redhill, who's the CMO from Deloitte. And we've decided that this would be a good forum to give a sneak preview of some of the results. Now, there's no doubt that our industry is a very fragmented industry now. We all have our unique challenges, industry organisations as well, as to how we survive and how we evolve. But we see this as a unique opportunity to unite us, to bring together creative agencies, media agencies, all the media owners, digital experts, social, advertisers and everybody, because really what we have here is the aggregated impact that advertising has on the economy. So I'd like you to welcome John and David to the stage. David first, obviously, and there will be time for a Q&A after. And I'd also like anybody that's got any ideas about how we take this to market, and we're aiming mid-November, come up and talk to me, because we're all open. We want to do it together.
Thanks, Tony. Good morning, everyone. This is exciting for John and I to actually bring this to life and share it with you guys. Tony's talked a little bit about Deloitte. We're a sort of global behemoth that span the compliance, accounting, tax and heritage services, as well as more digital services, consulting, human capital and so forth. And we're quite invested in research and thought leadership around a series called Building a Lucky Country, where we look at issues like digital disruption, growth areas of the Australian economy, the cost of red tape, the purpose of place and so forth. And we also do reports on valuing the impact and economic contribution of physical properties like the Sydney Opera House or the State Library of New South Wales or Questacon in Canberra, and more esoteric sort of qualities like the internet, the value of the internet to Australia. And in this case, advertising to us was both a fascinating topic to actually take on, but also one whose time had come, was probably overdue, given that we feel that the value, the impact and the importance of advertising to the Australian economy and to business and government is woefully misunderstood. So just wanted to talk a little bit about the purpose and the audience that we see for this report commissioned by the Communications Council, a bit about the project scope, a quick snapshot of Deloitte's own experience of this, because I think we have skin in the game, and we can actually speak with integrity about our own experience of using advertising and its impact upon our own business. And advertising in its broadest sense, marketing, communication, online, offline, above the line, below the line, in terms of internal and external engagement. And then John will take you through some key findings, the quantitative dimension of the report. So advertising pays is what we've called it, and its obvious purpose, as Tony alluded, we are here to provide an independent, robust and innovative analysis of the economic value of advertising in Australia. And the audience is the C-suite. Now, I'm not only the CMO at Deloitte, I'm a partner there too. I'm a co-owner of the business. And so I have to be convinced also of the real value and importance of marketing spend as a co-owner of the business. But more to the point, we want to see businesses appreciate that journey that marketing has made from the fringes of discretionary spend and start to think of it as an integral part of corporate business strategy. So too government, the effectiveness government has in executing policy with the help of advertising and its stance on regulation around the advertising industry, as well as its impact on Australian jobs and the number of people who are actually directly or indirectly employed in advertising. And we didn't set out as the primary audience the advertising industry. We want to actually give you guys an opportunity to have an independent, fiercely independent tool to actually to take to your clients to use as a sort of a manifesto with economic analysis underpinning it. And in terms of those three dimensions that we broke it down into these ideas of advertising delivering value, and we took on a number of case studies and spoke to a number of senior business and government people. We talked to Lucinda Barlow at Google. We spoke to Howard Silby at the Executive General Manager of Marketing at NAB, Tony Lowing, the MD at KFC Australia, Mark Ward, MD at Officeworks, a number of people who are heavily invested in aligning business strategy with advertising effectiveness. And we obviously included a number of case studies in this. The economic impacts of advertising on Australia, advertising pays. It pays Australia a high dividend, and we took a number of data sources then from which John will talk about, as well as some pretty impressive econometric modelling that Access Economics is in the habit of executing. And figured out the impacts on pricing, innovation, and information flow, and the putting together the soft and fuzzy with the very tangible impact it has on Australian business and government. And finally, the employment impacts. Advertising works. It gets people working. It keeps people in jobs. And once again, we drew on a variety of data sources as well as industry and occupational analysis. Now, this is a both sides of the wall sort of approach. Personally, I come from an agency background. I worked at Y&R and Landor before joining the client side. But more to the point, John and I represent the right and left brains of Deloitte, looking at the intangible value that advertising brings to the effectiveness of the way business gets done in creating competition, in communicating in a market-driven economy, and the numbers and the stats that actually underpin our hypothesis. Because advertising goes way beyond. This is the misconception, I guess, that we're trying to address. The advertising's main dimensions are all about selling, cajoling, guilt-inducing, persuading people to change their action, when in fact there is a noble purpose behind advertising, and that is to stimulate understanding, educate in a market-driven economy, better choices made by consumers, better choices made by voters, more informed decisions that actually make for a more flourishing, more innovative, more competitive economy. Our own experience at Deloitte, just as a quick case study before we get into some of the other case studies, in 2004 we were, as a Big Four firm, being pushed out of the Big Four and the media were talking about the sick puppy of the Big Four being Deloitte. We had lost our legitimacy within the Big Four, and with advertising like this, you wouldn't be surprised. We looked more like undertakers than consultants. And we took, for several years, we took a pretty innovative and broke the industry vernacular to start looking at advertising and simplifying the message, cutting through the clutter, and appealing directly to our target audiences in language they could understand without over-gilding the message. And the results started playing through in terms of market growth, the footprint of our market, our revenue growth. We actually doubled the size of the business and tripled our revenue within a decade. And by the time we got to sort of a state of iconic, very understated advertising that didn't patronize our audience, but really invited them into conversations in the way that we're accustomed to doing these days in marketing communication. We had overtaken Google as the most desirable brand in Australia to work for university graduates. And we had actually shaken up the rankings from having been a distant number 4 in the Big Four accounting firms. Last year we became the number 2 firm, and we're sort of challenging for market leadership. And in terms of respect in the market, this has really helped us. So acquiring businesses like Access Economics to make them Deloitte Access Economics, investing in innovation, a whole range of new capabilities, obviously that's all been a game changer for us, but we see advertising, marketing in the way that we have reframed the conversation around Deloitte, the way we've taken on the big issues in Australia and re-engaged our people to tell a different story. That has been a game changer for Deloitte. It's a great case study in terms of the way you use advertising to reposition and kickstart a business. So the report itself, we've produced it to look almost like a creative document. Advertising pays. And some of the stats, instead of presenting them as boring infographics, we've actually produced them with the key messages in mind to deliver in the style of advertising. And so this first dimension, advertising delivers. What does it deliver? Well, it obviously delivers on corporate strategy. It's got an integral role in helping businesses do just that. It helps connect emotionally to audiences through creativity, and that's, duh for this room, but to actually impress upon a CFO the import of that emotional connection, of the discretionary effort that it actually elicits from employees, and the emotional loyalty that a consumer will build. That can be measured. Omnivorous audiences thrive on a healthy, balanced diet. So this idea that you shouldn't be putting all your eggs into one basket. Systematically tracking, the importance of tracking brand perceptions, and actually in the absence of a figure on a balance sheet, remembering that there is a value to brands and it should be incorporated and factored into investment strategy. The importance to employees and to people in the supply chain of a business or even within government, the importance of the people invested in the brand idea of advertising. It's not just about selling or addressing the outside market. Your internal audience is equally important in advertising. And finally, the role of consistent and authentic advertising communications in executing government policy. So as I said, we had a number of case studies that we've included, and we talked to people like Howard Silby from NAB, who was the author and the executor, I guess, of the breakup campaign, which was highly successful, not only in reframing perceptions of NAB within the Big Four banks, but also in engaging employees in the brand idea. And Howard says advertising plays a massive role in engaging employees to live the purpose of the brand, as well as getting our market, our audience, behind and invested in the purpose of NAB as an institution. And it helps us ensure that we execute the corporate strategy effectively and constructively. The Lamnesia campaign, the second dimension of creativity. The Meat and Livestock Australia could have simply communicated the product qualities or the importance to the Australian economy of this industry. Instead, they took a very creative approach to promoting a fictitious psychological condition that makes people forget their Australian identity caused by the lack of lamb. In contrast to the more prosaic way of doing it. Now, sales uplift of 48% during Australia Day week, and more to the point, a 70% uplift in associating lamb as Australia's national meat just shows you how much more effectively you can turbocharge brand impact with creative advertising. The KFC, we talked, as I said, to Tony Lowings, of the MD of KFC, who doesn't think of advertising spend as discretionary. You know, in as much as you need to invest in people and talent, you need to invest in R&D and research, you need to invest in training, you need to invest in rolling stock or plant, you need to invest in advertising. That's simply, that is non-negotiable. And KFC is sort of exemplar of the omnivorous audience having a balanced diet of the online gaming of snack in the face, choices of where to engage with this campaign through merchandising, point of sale, television, radio or press. The key message there is, once again, don't put your eggs in one basket. Think expansively about the variety of ways you need to engage with a very diverse audience, and your audiences are as diverse in their media consumption as they are in their voting habits and their personal tastes. The need for brand measurement. This is another sort of graphic that we've used in the report. The value of Brand Australia, the sum total of the brands in Australia is 120 billion, and that's on top of what things actually physically cost to run. And that sort of reinforces this need that to track and measure brand value in Australia. It should be recorded and thought of as an item on the balance sheet. In terms of the employee engagement category, once again, a Deloitte example, something co-created with our agency, but then is taken on board by our employees. This is one of our employees taking literally the we do both idea. We think inside and outside the box, and she photoshopped herself twice. Once you start getting sort of your advertising extrapolated without your logo, with the core message on T-shirts across the organisation, people start feeling like a tribe. They start giving you that discretionary effort, which is so elusive in today's business. But the whole idea of employee loyalty is the last 20% that seldom gets measured in actually executing and driving a successful corporate strategy. And finally, this element of advertising's role in keeping Australia in tune with government policy, and the need for authenticity and effectiveness in executing government policy through effective marketing communications. So we looked at a number of case studies, but in particular where you see the essential educational and informational role that advertising plays in Australia and helps government get good policy done. It's frequently overlooked in terms of the advertising industry's overall value to the Australian economy. If it keeps people healthy, and you measure that against the cost to Australia of ill health, obesity and smoking and so forth, that's another hidden but very substantial benefit to Australia of the advertising industry. So that's the first sort of key dimension, advertising delivers. I'm going to hand over now to my partner John O'Mahony to talk about the modelling.
Australia makes a very significant investment in advertising every year. We've estimated that it's about 1% of our gross domestic product, of our total economy, which Australia pours into advertising each year. In 2014, worth $12.6 billion spent on advertising in newspapers, in magazines, on TV, online, all the different channels, the different paid channels of advertising in Australia, recognising that that's part of the advertising puzzle, along with the other own channels, the earned channels for advertising, which companies have at their disposal as well. This chart up here on the slide shows the growth in advertising over the past couple of decades, underscoring the point on the backdrop here of the industry's midlife crisis, showing that after strong growth during the 1990s and 2000s, two big changes in advertising spend in the last few years. First, a big decline during the economic downturn of 2007, and secondly, slower growth in advertising spending since the recovery has taken place. The first one reflects a worrying feeling that we have that amongst Australian corporate business leaders, advertising can be seen as a discretionary spending item, and that when economic times are tough and there's less money around, an easy area to cut back on is advertising, rather than investing more in advertising to continue growing. And even since the economic recovery, we see slower growth in advertising spending, reflecting both the weakness of the economic recovery, but also the structural change, the midlife crisis, the structural change going on in the industry, with new, cheaper forms of advertising being available to businesses, and businesses also using other ways to communicate their marketing and communications messages. So it's against this backdrop that Tony Hale and the Communications Council asked us to estimate the business and economic impact of advertising on Australia. And how we wanted to go about doing it was to look beyond the direct spending, the $12.6 billion, and the associated employment from advertising, to have a broader view on how it is that advertising contributes to our economy and contributes to our prosperity. We went back to basics and to understand what role it is that advertising contributes by persuading people, cajoling people, by informing consumers. Advertising is the fuel of our market economy. Without advertising, we wouldn't have the market economy as we know it today. It underpins price competition. Without advertising and being able to choose between different products, there wouldn't be that competitive force on businesses driving quality improvements, driving innovation and productivity. Advertising lifts our GDP and makes us a richer nation. It also contributes some things that we can't easily measure by fostering more consumer choice. It generates something that's called consumer surplus that sits on top of the strict economic benefits, and can also help sectors of the economy that aren't well measured inside gross domestic product. We call them non-market sectors like health and education, and some of the benefits there can be underestimated by GDP. So we're asked to perform this calculation. We're usually asked how we go about doing these things, and to turn people off, I normally click up our economic model, and usually after I put that up, there aren't any more questions about how we do the economic modelling. It looks like a complicated model, but underlying it is a fairly simple set of concepts for all the lambdas and thetas that are in the equation, which is simply that our national prosperity, our gross domestic product, is built on our labour, on our capital, and our smarts as a country. But it's also built on the efficiency with which we can combine that human capital, the physical capital of Australia. And that's how we've incorporated advertising into our economic growth model at Deloitte Access Economics. That is to understand how advertising contributes to efficiency inside businesses. We've also accounted for how other factors can affect prosperity, like research and development, trade openness, and education in a country. We compiled a stack of data from 13 different countries over 30 years to answer the basic question of how does advertising intensity and advertising activity contribute to a nation's prosperity. And the big number was $40 billion that our model produced, which is to say that while Australia directly spends $12.6 billion on advertising, the return that we get as a nation is 4 times that, almost 4 times that, $40 billion to our economy each year, which is the equivalent of almost $2,000 for every man, woman and child in Australia. It's not a precise estimate to 2 decimal places. It's an indication of the importance of the sector to the economy. It puts advertising on the map. It'll make advertising part of the national conversation of Australia's economic prosperity. That's our hope for this report and this number. Our report also details how it has a particularly important role in New South Wales and Victoria as a sector, and how particular industries like retail, finance and automotive are in particular using advertising to turbocharge our prosperity. Of course, we produce reports like this all the time that create big headlines and have big numbers in them. We think that this impact of advertising is a very significant number. By way of comparison, we've done a previous study on the value of the internet to Australia and how the internet facilitates choice by consumers and drives competition. And for that study, we found the productivity impact of the internet was $45 billion, i.e. of a similar magnitude to the impact of advertising. Previously, studied a major economic reform like national competition policy, which was introduced in Australia in the early 1990s. The estimate of that, again, a similar number of about $40 billion as a contribution to our national economic prosperity, which is to say that advertising is up there. It's as big as a major controversial economic policy, a big sector of the economy, or something as fandangle as the internet. And yet, on the drive up this morning, David and I were reflecting that it is with some irony that the advertising sector, as brilliant as it is as advertising every single other product and service in Australia, ironically, hasn't potentially done as strong a job of advertising itself. And I think if you were to ask most people how important is the sector to the economy, how important is it for our prosperity, most people would shrug their shoulders and they'd say, not sure, or is that as important as some of our most important economic policies or our sectors? Is it really a priority? This report, Advertising Pays, says that this sector should rightly take its place at the top of the economic and national debate in Australia as a big driver of prosperity. It puts the figures behind, puts the substance behind those claims to start that conversation about why your sector is so important. It's just an invisible driver of prosperity. It's like the story of the two young fish swimming up the sea and they run into the old fish. And the old fish says, "What's the water temperature like downstream?" And the young fish says, "Water? What's water?" Sometimes it's the thing which is all around you which you don't notice, and that's what advertising is like in the market economy, driving our prosperity, fueling competition, fueling innovation. The other dividend which we looked at as part of our report was the impact on jobs, the number of people whose employment depends upon the advertising sector. We split it up into three different parts: the direct, the indirect and the supported employment. The first part is the direct employment of the advertising industry, which we estimate as 56,000 jobs, according to our cut of the Australian Bureau of Statistics. About 10,000 of those are in the core occupations of the advertising industry. If you think in terms of black shirts and cool haircuts, the sort of people who we had to work with as part of putting this report together. They're in the core occupations of advertising specialists, managers, marketeers, content developers, the rest being in other roles. One thing which I found interesting is that a lot of people who have an advertising occupation don't work in an advertising business. It's only about half of the people who have an advertising job who actually work in an advertising business. The other half of advertisers work in the rest of the economy, in retail or in government or in other sectors, in finance and elsewhere. Some of them work at Deloitte, which is to say that the advertising business is more than just that core part of people who work in advertising businesses. The second group which we looked at was the supply chain, which is to say that there are a lot of other jobs that depend upon your spending as advertisers. It's indirect employment of about 48,000 people, jobs like design, printing, market research, photography, production and other jobs. Which is to say that for every person who is working in advertising, they're supporting another job somewhere else in the economy because of that supply chain. And finally, the supported jobs, which is a theme that I'm sure you've heard about before. We put a number on it. We estimate 103,000 Australians whose jobs depend on advertising, even though they don't work in advertising and they don't work in the advertising supply chain. They work in a range of other industries, TV, newspapers, music, sport and elsewhere, in content provision, jobs whose existence can be traced back to spending on advertising. Not all of them are 100% advertising supported. Some of them are supported by advertising 100%, some of them 50% or 70% or even 5% in some sectors. Examples like the Big Bash League, that is a competition built for TV, and that means built for advertising. I had lunch with Ross Gittins recently, the economics editor at the Sydney Morning Herald. I told him about this project. He thought it was fascinating, couldn't wait to get a copy of it and write about it, and he pointed to himself and he said, "John, my job depends on advertising. I am paid by advertising." And it's taking that broader view of the employment impact of advertising that our report tries to do. All told, 200,000 people in Australia whose jobs depend upon advertising. And to put that in context, that is as many people who work in agriculture in Australia, as many people who work in building and construction, as many people who work in tertiary education. So while advertising may not always be up there in lights as one of the key sectors of the Australian economy, this report says that it is. For every one job in advertising, 3 other jobs supported across the economy. And that's what this report is about. It's about bringing together the overall messages of what the sector brings to our economy, what it brings to business, what it brings to GDP, what it brings to employment. It'll be a couple of months for us to organise the event and to hopefully make a splash in the media market and also in the national conversation. As Tony said, we'd be very pleased to discuss some of the details with you and how we're going about doing that in the next couple of months, and I think soon we'll be able to invite some comment from the floor as well. So thank you very much.